Hello and welcome back to Data News of the Week. You know how it is by now. This is the video where we take all the little stories that have happened this week that involve data and squeeze it into a single video. And let's start it off with brand new big hard drives. We've already talked about it here on the blog, but WD have announced and indeed released, they haven't just announced it, but full availability commercially of their 22 TB drives in the WD Red Pro series for NAS, the WD Gold series, a data center class drive there, and the WD Purple Pro series, their top tier surveillance drives there. And we've done a whole article over on NAS Compares comparing their specifications and more, but you can go over to the official WD pages to find out. And as you can see, they aren't just announced, they have been added officially to each of the respective pages. We can go on there and you can see that the WD Red Pro 22TB is knocking around for about 600 nicker, and we can go and move even further forward. And if we go into the Pro series, you'll see the price dips down substantially. We'll get onto that in just a moment. And once again, if we go to the Gold series drive, it goes up to 661. So if we put the Gold there, you can see it goes 661, 600 or so, and down to 496. Now, why is that? Obviously, because these drives have different purposes. With the NAS series drive there, the NAS series drive there, the Pro having to be a much more balanced read-write activity drive there and be on 24/7, whereas the Gold series drive is similar to that, but on a much more intensive environment with much larger arrays than that found with the Red Pros that go up to about 12 or 24 bay. The Gold series are virtually limitless data center class utilization there. The reason the Pro is significantly, the Purple Pro is lower in price than those is it's a surveillance drive and therefore far more geared towards write than read, with it activity on that drive probably closer to 95 to 99% write activity, with the rare instances of read when surveillance footage is being reviewed. And remember, surveillance, you might have days, weeks, months or years of footage there. So again, and also with these larger drives, they are designed for more robust and supportive use in AI related surveillance services, which are particularly dense and high activity write operations there. Now, before we wrap up talking about the 22 TBs, it's worth addressing a couple of other things that are quite relevant to this. First and foremost, that Seagate Ironwolf have not revealed a NAS 22 TB, at least in commercial availability. Why is that a point of contention, or at least a point to highlight? Simply that things have really changed in the last few years when it comes to hard drives. And I remember not so long ago, maybe even as little as 18 months, when it was always Seagate cracking the largest capacities for commercial availability before WD. They were always the first to bring to the field the largest capacities. And indeed, when Seagate were talking about their 16 and 18 TB drive, the WD Red Pro series was still at 12 TB at that point and only slightly flirting with 14 TB. In the last 18 months, we've seen WD go 14, 16, 18 and 20 and 22 TB incredibly rapidly. So it's a real change of field of play when it comes to hard drives right now, with WD pushing out the larger capacities, at least to commercial availability, at least not on, if not on their roadmap, before Seagate, something I never thought I'd see. And the last thing we should touch on is, according to Storage Newsletter, they detailed while monitoring shipments of the big three hard drive brands out there, Seagate, WD and Toshiba, that sales numbers of hard drives had gone down quite substantially quarter on quarter, year against year, compared with obviously 2021 there and closing stage 2020. But it is worth remembering when you do hear this statistic that at the end of 2020 and particularly 2021 up until September, October of 2021, there was Chia. It was a cryptocurrency where larger capacity hard drives were being bought up in stupendous speeds, with availability being incredibly poor. So you have to factor in not only availability versus sales in that figure, but also the fact that last year was a peak year for larger scale capacity drives being bought up on bulk and at the point of production for that Chia cryptocurrency, something that has largely gone away for the most part, although it might be like other cryptocurrencies where it buggers off into the background being very quiet until suddenly there's a BuzzFeed article that suddenly people realise it's worth some money again, but who knows. But let's move on. Next up, we're just going to talk about some QNAP stuff here. First and foremost, a new product that we should have talked about in the previous video, but it kind of got skipped over a little bit, and that is a new value series 4-bay from the brand. We already talked about the 53E series in a recent video, but this is an economy series box, the TS-433. It takes advantage of an ARM-based processor, and that's an A55 Cortex CPU there, and again, that's a 64-bit. This is the CPU that I've been talking about recently. I think we're going to see a lot more in the NAS world right now, not just QNAP as well as the new value series, perhaps being as popular as we saw that Realtek RTD processor in 2019, 2020 and 2021. This is a system that arrives with 4 gig of non-upgradable memory, but it does have a 2.5 gigabit Ethernet port there on the rear. It doesn't have any highfalutin USBs and it doesn't have NVMe SSD cache, but what it does have is a very affordable and quite fast general architecture there in the middle. Now, before we wrap things up on this, and we can talk a little bit more about the specs, but we may do a dedicated video on this and a comparison with the 431 series and the X and the KX series later down the line. But the other thing I want to talk about with QNAP is something I've not really touched on much on the channel, and there was a little ping on this subject earlier this week, but it's actually a broader topic over the last few months. QNAP have been rolling out a lot of PCIe Gen 4 upgrade cards. Okay, so you may have noticed if you go to their site, particularly if you head into the Taiwanese pages, less so in the Western and the European pages, there's a lot of new PCIe Gen 4 cards being added now, such as this, a dual port 100 gig card. So that's two 100 gigabyte cards. So that's 10 gigabyte 100 gigabytes per second, or 10 gigabytes ports, gigabits. There you go, my brain fuzzing. I'm not even going to cut this out. My brain's going nuts. But this is a PCIe 4x16 card. So you're going to need quite a huge slot there. Not a lot of NASs have this, which is a point I'll get onto in a moment. But that card there is the only thing that's really going to give you the full bandwidth that this card, with its two 100 gigabit ports, is to reach full saturation. But that's not even really it, because then you've got those combo cards that they had that have got 1 and 2 10 GBE ports combined with NVMe SSD slots, 2 slots inside, each of which are PCIe Gen 4. What I'm saying here is we are seeing a huge increase in production of NVMe and 10 GBE combo cards, as well as standalone cache cards that are PCIe Gen 4, and those 100 gigabit cards getting into the fold as well. Now, why is this such an important point? Because at the moment, there's only about 2 QNAPs that are PCIe Gen 4, which ultimately means that QNAP must be dancing around with PCIe Gen 4 systems in the coming future, particularly for the Q3 and maybe even Q4 period, because they would not go to the trouble of unveiling this many cards that are PCIe Gen 4 for the only PCIe Gen 4 systems at the moment, which are the flash servers, which already arrive with 25 gigabit Ethernet ports on them. So again, I think it's going to be really intriguing to watch QNAP and their releases, how many of them arrive on the scene with PCIe Gen 4 in the coming weeks and months. Next up, let's talk about SSDs, and some of you may have heard that the one of the longest running SSDs in the PCIe Gen 4x4 community, the WD Black SN850, has now been finally, after an incredibly long time, officially certified as a PS5 official product there. It takes a lot of work for Sony to put the badge on a product officially, and they now have it on the WD Black. A lot of you may have highlighted before that, of course, when SSDs were first being highlighted to be compatible with the PS5, the PlayStation 5 system from Sony, that Mark Cerny, one of the original architects of the PS5, highlighted his SSD of choice. And although we've tested a lot of SSDs out there, you know, the WD Black has never really left the top 3, maybe the top 5 in a pinch, depending on the test that we perform. So it was almost certainly going to be one of the choices. I'm surprised we've not seen official Seagate branding. First, because I think Seagate were one of the loudest about their partnership with Sony, but WD clearly beat them to the punch there with that official branding. But it's not really an open-shut case yet, because there's a few little things that have been highlighted on other websites. First and foremost, if you go to the official pages of the WD website there, they've added the branding. Obviously, they've clearly had to pay through the nose for that. But the price seems slightly off, because now they've added that branding on there, which again, clearly they have paid for there. A number of users have noticed that the pricing of the WD Black has now changed quite a lot. Over on the videogamechronicle.com, they highlighted that the heatsink there, nearly identical, with just a slight change on the light there on the side panel, has gone up. The drive has gone up quite substantially over that time. And again, they factor in sales. It is a drive that's been around on the market for 2 years or so, but still, it seems really weird that that price has gone up. And bear in mind, the drive right now with the heatsink is listed at $179 for the 1TB. You can head over to Amazon and it's $109 with the heatsink at 1TB. It seems like a weird increase to me, whether that's WD trying to flush all of the non-PS5 branded ones, because it's PS5 compatible on these, but of course what they are pleased about is that it's an official licensed product now. So again, if you were thinking of getting a WD Black, I strongly recommend getting it now before these new branded models arrive on the scene and start mucking around with the pricing there, because it's the same SSD. There's no difference there. And the other thing to bear in mind is WD have another version of this drive in the works, the SN850X, which is a higher performing version of this drive, still yet to arrive on the scene. And whether they're waiting for the old branded stock to disappear before they fully release it, because it has been announced kind of semi-officially, is quite surprising. But again, I'm not sure how I feel about this price difference, if indeed it is true that they have increased the price for the official certified product that's the same drive or not. But still, nonetheless, it's still great to know that people that are looking to upgrade their PlayStation systems are now going to have a much easier choice available to them. And finally, a number of you, whether you're browsing your social media site of choice or you take an invested look in that world around us of natural and space exploration, the James Webb Telescope, we're getting some of those first images. Why am I talking about this? I'll get onto this in a moment. But I'm sure you've seen it in lots of different websites online, some of the comparisons, not only between the shots being taken, but how they compare with the Hubble telescope, which is kind of showing its age. Seems like an incredibly mean thing to say, but definitely the quality of the James Webb Telescope is fantastic there. Why am I talking about it on Data News of the Week? Well, largely because of the size of the SSD inside. This is my Google 6 Pro phone here. It's 128 gig SSD storage there inside. You can get it, another version of it that's got 256. Now, the Webb Telescope has, I believe, an 86 gigabyte SSD inside. If you scroll all the way down through this article here on spectrum.ieee, you can find out that the storage of it is a 68 gig solid state drive. Now, some of you might be thinking, are you having a laugh? Largely because they talk about the daily photo schedule of the Webb Telescope is 57 gigabytes right now. That doesn't leave a lot of room to play with. Now, a lot of that is to do with the transmission of data back to Earth, the upload-download, particularly the upload there, because you are talking about tremendous distances. And as you can see, the amount of daily data that's being generated of 1 to 2 gigabytes generate just over time means that although it's not going to fill it up at any time soon, when they talk about just how much data is being transmitted because of that performance, speed and distance, it does still seem like a rather meager SSD there. Now, again, this is because they need high performance, durable SSDs in that environment, not only because of overuse and wear, but more precisely because of radiation. It has been detailed on a bunch of other places, but the most concise quotation and argument is over there on Engadget when they're talking about some of the temperatures reaching less than 50 degrees above absolute zero, and then they're talking about the radiation damage. This SSD has been hardened with radiation hardening agents all the way around it, and multi layers wrapped around it. And even then, they think that it still can't withstand some of the radiation damage, where it will make its way down to as low as 57 gigabytes. So again, it's going to be really strange over time how this SSD does perform over that time, but it's quite incredible that the satellite in space that was able to attain these incredible images is running on such a comparatively meager SSD size for 2022. But this has been Data News of the Week. The links to all today's articles are of course listed in the description. Have a great weekend. Next week we're going to be looking a lot more on enterprise hard drives. We're going to be returning to the subject of hard drives there, and we've got a couple of little surprise tests coming through with some Synology and QNAP stuff. But stay tuned for that. Have a great weekend. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.